In the year 1989, Disney released the animated title The Little Mermaid, which dramatically changed the psyche of their princesses compared to the previous princess Aurora from 1959's The Sleeping Beauty. Passive and naive princess turned to curious and adventurous after 30 years. But still, a general stereotype sustained with the concept of princess ever since Disney's first princess title, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, released in 1937. Small, petite, delicately fair with tiny waist and perfect hair were the physical traits attributed for a princess in almost all the Disney princess movies. Disney often caricatures the idea of femininity in their movies using very distinctive feminine characteristics, like the seductive tone or bashing eyelashes. And these stereotypes present to the audience an age-old notion of women that does not reflect women in our modern day society. Instead, this notion helps to strengthen stereotypes and the ideals of what femininity should be like. As you might have noticed while watching early Disney movies, happily ever after can be achieved only when they secure the male protagonist. The first notable change from the happily ever after storyline took place in 1995's Pocahontas, when she decides to stay rather than join John Smith on his way back home. Here comes the importance of the Bechdel test. This test used 3 questions to evaluate active female participation and, in some sense, gender equality in movies. The questions are there at least 2 women? Do they talk to each other about something other than a man? Unsurprisingly, majority of the Disney movies fail to pass this test. Speaking about men in Disney movies, initially one-dimensional, each man progressively becomes more and more complex, with recent titles like Tangled, Frozen, where the male protagonist sheds his connection to royalty and privilege to present simple human beings. On the other hand, we see villains in Disney taking rather closed, stereotypical approach. If we look closely, we see not many changes neither in terms of appearance nor in complexity. Disney has 2 kinds of villains, the ones without unnaturally colored skin and the ones with. Except for the lack of unnatural skin tones, they all have similar physical features. One point to note is how very much a Disney villain with all their facial features bear a resemblance to the general idea of a transgendered person. In fact, Ursula, the villain from The Little Mermaid, was inspired from the late drag queen Divine. The villains are absolutely diabolical and in that sense serves their role perfectly. However, there's the possibility that a child may associate a villain to set characteristics, which poses 2 problems. 1. People who bear resemblance will unnecessarily be misunderstood. 2. Children may fail to grasp the fact that a villain does not necessarily have to look in a specific manner. Dr. Justin Lewis in the documentary Mickey Mouse Monopoly gives us a concept of a similar effect that these movies have on children and their ideas.
Because Disney are such a large media corporation and their products are so ubiquitous and so widespread globally, Disney's stories, the stories that Disney's tell, will be the stories that will form and help form a child's imaginary world all over the world. And that's an incredible amount of power, enormous amount of power. And when you have that kind of power, when you're essentially becoming a dominant storyteller for children globally, we have to begin to ask very serious questions about what kind of stories are being told here. Are these the stories we really want our children to hear? Would we like to ask children to hear other kinds of stories? And if we don't ask those kinds of questions, then essentially we're allowing Disney to shape our children's imaginations in certain kinds of ways.
The concept of body image was rather misrepresented as we see in these characters. It affects children in their most impressionable age, setting them unnatural ideals to live up to and to expect in their partners in the future. This is especially true with how all the evil characters are extremely over or underweight and have features of the opposite sex, while all the princesses are petite with long locks and the princes have a well-built, perfectly toned body. For example, in an analysis of appearances of the villains in a blog post title, Crossing Gender Lines, the author comments, "The absence of hair makes the villainesses severely less feminine and shows that women who are not feminine are unnatural. Their appearance sends the message that pure and good women have long flowing hair and that women who neglect their appearance are outsiders and evil." Disney has, at least in some senses, seemed to succeed in maintaining a noble ratio when it comes to role distribution by gender. Especially when it comes to villains in Disney, there isn't much of a disparity between the number of male and female villains. Interestingly though, in a fan-based rating, 4 out of Disney's top 5 antagonists happen to be women. Let us take a look at the representation of the LGBTQIA community. It's about time Disney broke free from its prince plus princess is equal to happily ever after concept and start focusing on heroes and heroines who might not necessarily conform to the gender stereotypes and expectations. It's way past time for a gay prince or a transgender princess or even an asexual to be represented and for it to be okay. With regards to all these points raised, Disney had been extremely innovative and has taken a pioneering step in their production of 2016's Moana, where the protagonist is her own heroine, representing a community that has long been in the sidelines, and for once, she does not need a man to swoop in and save her, especially for the present generation of women who are proactive problem solvers and multitaskers who fight their own fights. Inspired by DreamWorks' Shrek, self-padding movies like Enchanted, which openly mocks the Barbie-like princess tradition, are welcome additions to the new renaissance Disney is shooting for. Disney's live-action remake of Beauty and the Beast had an active inclusion of dark-skinned actors as well as a brief representation of a gay couple. But unfortunately, those characters are marginalized like Gaston's sidekick in the movie. In their defense, Disney is trying to portray the movies in their respective time periods and hence the sexist tone. This can be fixed by focusing more on genres other than fairy tales, which can easily portray gender and racial equality without changing the general time frame or background of the story. Big Hero 6, Zootopia are prime examples of that method of storytelling. One of the major reasons why Disney started off with a now primitive princess formula is because of the time period Walt Disney and his fellow creators were in. Later on, they decided to stick with the formula because it raked in money at the box office. As their influence over the media expanded, the image of femininity and masculinity they portrayed translated as the norm to the audience. Recent films like Frozen, Big Hero 6, Zootopia, and Moana seem to be challenging this 80-year-old formula and pushing to introduce movies suited for the modern, present generation, encouraging change toward betterment as a race. Disney, as a major influence in pop culture, should narrate stories that advocate for underrepresented sections of the gender spectrum and help people understand the need for gender equality to be the norm, not a struggle.